and there's much more, but we find out, and there's an article in the American Thinker by Daniel John Sabisky, and it talks about Uranium-1, and it says back in July, I called for a criminal investigation into Hillary Clinton's collusion with Russia to turn over control of 20% of our uranium supplies to Russian interests in return for some $145 million in donations to the Clinton Foundation. Now, it turns out there was one. An FBI investigation dating back to 2009 with current Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller up to their eyeballs in covering up evidence of Hillary's collusion bordering on treason with Vladimir Putin's Russia. Prior to the Obama administration approving the very controversial deal in 2010, giving Russia 20% of America's uranium, the FBI had evidence that Russian nuclear industry officials were involved in bribery, kickbacks, extortion, and money laundering in order to benefit Vladimir Putin, says a report by The Hill. John Solomon, Allison Spann of The Hill, federal agent, said this: federal agents used confidential U.S. witness working inside the Russian nuclear industry to gather extensive financial records, make secret recordings, and intercept emails as early as 2009 that showed Moscow had compromised an American uranium trucking firm with bribes and kickbacks in violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FBI and court documents show. So from today's report, we find out that the investigation was supervised by then U.S. Attorney Rod Rosenstein, who is now President Trump's Deputy Attorney General, and then Assistant FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who is now the Deputy FBI Director under Trump. Robert Mueller was head of the FBI from 2001 through September 2013 until James Comey took over as FBI Director in 2013. They were both involved in this Russian scam, being that this case started in 2009 and ended in 2015. And let me insert parenthetically, Mr. Speaker, I don't know who recommended that the U.S. attorney investigating Russian collusion with Hillary Clinton and with the trucking firm, with others here in the United States, but whoever recommended Rod Rosenstein to President Trump as Deputy Attorney General should be fired, whoever that was. They're not there to help President Trump. On further down, the article says, Tuesday on Fox Business Network, Lou Dobbs tonight, Breitbart editor-at-large and the author of Clinton Cash, Peter Schweitzer, said there needs to be a federal investigation into the Russian uranium deal. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's State Department approved after the Clinton Foundation received $145 million from the shareholders of Uranium-1. So it's rather interesting. The article goes on to point out that about the investigation into Hillary Clinton, and it quotes from Schweitzer saying a lot of people don't realize it now in parts of the Midwest. American soil is owned by Vladimir Putin's government because this deal went through. He goes on and makes some interesting observation. At the conclusion, he says, actually, we no longer need an investigation of Hillary Clinton and Uranium-1. This FBI investigation, in conjunction to what we already know, is prima facie evidence of criminal corruption and intentional putting of American national security at risk for personal financial gain. Then this article from Lee Smith, March 13th, titled Robert Mueller's Beltway Cover-Up. And this points out that if the deep state here, and it does cross party lines, They wanted somebody to effectively cover up all of the leaks, each one of which is a crime punishable by time in prison. If the deep state here in Washington wanted somebody that could protect all these criminals that are working in intelligence or FBI that regularly leak information to hurt people that threaten their power here in Washington, then they could not have a better person as special counsel than Robert Mueller, as overseen by Rosenstein. Points out that Mueller took his job not at the behest of the man who by all accounts he is likely to professionally and personally disdain, Donald Trump, but of the blue chip beltway elite of which he is a charter member. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein appointed him nearly a year ago to lead an investigation without parameters. That's because Mueller's job is to obscure the abuses of the U.S. surveillance apparatus that occurred under the Obama administration. The fact that someone at the level of former FBI director was called in to sweep up the mess left by bad actors in the Bureau and Central Intelligence Agency and other parts of the intelligence bureaucracy suggests that the problems are even worse than previously thought. And that means the constituency for Mueller's political intervention is enormous. Mueller is said to believe that Eric Prince's meeting, he's referencing back in January 2017 with a Russian banker, that would be well after the election, obviously, was set up to set up a back channel with the Kremlin. But that makes no sense. According to the foundational text of the collusion narrative, the dossier allegedly written by former British spy Christopher Steele, the Kremlin had cultivated Trump himself for years. So what's the purpose of a back channel when supposedly Vladimir Putin already had a key to the front door of Mar-a-Lago? Further, the collusion thesis holds that the Trump circle teamed with high-level Russian officials for the purpose of winning the 2016 election. How does a meeting that Eric Prince had a week before Trump's inauguration advance the crooked election victory plot? It doesn't. It contradicts it. Eric Prince may well be involved in questionable practices that would make people's blood run cold, and he talked some about Eric Prince. But the idea that whenever anyone who supported Trump or even voted for him met with a Russian national, the dish on the menu was treason is the stuff of Cold War B movies. But it's also evidence of something more than prosecutorial overreach. The fact that Mueller has zeroed in on Prince points to a key motive behind his ongoing investigation. And he talks about Prince thrown into the middle of Russiagate after April 3rd, 2017, Washington Post reported his meeting with the Russian banker. But how did anyone know about the meeting? After the story came out, Prince said he was shown specific evidence by sources from the intelligence community that the information was swept up in the collection of electronic communications and his identity was unmasked. The U.S. official or officials who gave his name to the Washington Post broke the law when they leaked classified information. And then on further, it says Mueller presumably knows whether Prince's name was indeed unmasked and then leaked to the press, and that the leak was a crime. Mueller certainly knows that most of the case he has regarding Russian interference in the 2016 election was built by abuses of the foreign intelligence surveillance apparatus and other related crimes that are punishable with jail time. The identity of Trump's short-term national security advisor, Michael Flynn, was swept up and leaked to the press in the same way as Prince's. It was leaked to the same newspaper, the Washington Post. As I explained last week, the identity of Attorney General Jeff Sessions was also unmasked from an intelligence intercept and leaked to the Washington Post. The fact that the FBI had secured a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant on Carter Page was also leaked to the Post. The warrant on Page was secured on the basis of findings in the Steele dossier, an unverified piece of opposition research paid for by the Clinton campaign and Democratic National Committee. As director of the FBI during the post-9/11 period, when foreign intelligence surveillance and its abuses were made regular front-page headlines, Mueller knows exactly how the system can be abused and what the penalties are. He also recognizes that Russiagate is evidence of how it was abused and who abused it, including some of the same people he worked with during his 12-year tenure as FBI director. The purpose of the Mueller inquiry is therefore not to investigate the most ludicrously seeming charges in the Steele dossier, but to protect the institution of the FBI, former colleagues, as well as the national security surveillance system. Therefore, the inquiry has to cover up the sinful origins of the collusion narrative itself, which was born in repeated abuses of power and subsequent crimes committed by U.S. officials in the intelligence bureaucracy and the Obama administration. So, Mr. Speaker, regardless of what anybody thinks of President Donald Trump, and I know there are some there are some Republicans that are unhappy that he was elected president, want him gone at all cost. And I know that most of the Democrats, I know it just grieves them to no end that he was elected. They want him gone at all cost. But at some point, members of Congress in the House and Senate have got to wake up to the fact that we have crimes being committed in the FBI and in our intelligence apparatus. There are people who are being paid with government checks who are out to destroy people who disagree with their power grabs and their crimes. This article points out Mueller's investigation has got to drag on as long as necessary to prevent any of the people who have committed the crimes of leaking and other crimes, leaking, lying, perjury, obstructing justice, trying to create an insurance policy to take out a sitting president of the United States. It's time we wake up. When elected officials in this city have to fear for their political lives by people that they have given power in the FBI, DOJ, CIA, NSA, then the system's broken. It is out of control. And it's how you lose a democratic republic like we have, or like we used to have. It's time to get it under control. Mueller is not the answer. He's the problem. He is the poster child for the problem that he's created during his entire tenure. And if he had any decency, he would have never accepted this special prosecution on anything involving Russia, because he had been involved in that investigation, and because he remained silent or perhaps spoke up to keep it hush-hush. But he and Rosenstein both, they should have stopped the sale of 20% of our uranium to a national enemy. Apparently, the Obama administration was so intent on that reset because they felt like, George W. Bush just overreacted. All Putin did was invade Georgia, one country invading another, smaller, weaker country. And Bush, they felt like overreacted, said you shouldn't be doing this. put some sanctions in place. So they wanted to show we're just fine with you invading adjoining countries, maybe even those that don't adjoin, but sure, at least adjoining countries. They gave the red light, whether they knew it or not, to Putin to invade the Crimea, invade Ukraine. And they gave the green light. They had to know this because it was part of what they did. They gave the green light to the sale of 20% of our uranium to a country that most recently had its dictatorial leader bragging that he had missiles that he could put those nukes on that the United States couldn't stop. And those nukes can be tipped, at least 20% of them, with what Hillary Clinton, Mueller, Rosenstein had to be complicit in giving them and letting them have. This is serious stuff. But until the leakers and the abusers of our intelligence system are brought to justice, then nobody that believes in representative government is safe. We end up like China, like Russia, where you're scared to death of the people behind the scenes, behind the government, or even the dictatorial leader, because you know they made you and they can destroy you. And when the free press is not free, they're complicit in assisting in the committing of crimes by gladly accepting the leaks, publishing them to complete the crime. We're in big trouble. So I would say, you know, if Mueller had any decency, he would just resign. And he doesn't even have to explain how wrong it was for him to accept the appointment. I had hoped that the damage he did to the FBI would have come to an end when his 10 years was up. But, oh no, President Obama was so thrilled with the things he was doing, he extended his term 2 years and pushed through Congress. People wouldn't listen to me. Oh no, this is not a guy you want for 2 more years. He's done enough damage. And any Republican that says, oh, he'll be fair, is either desperately wanting President Trump gone or is intentionally ignoring the facts of Mueller's background from the days as the assistant U.S. attorney in charge of crime in Boston up through the present. There's a lot of innocent people that lie in his wake. Some of them got multi-million-dollar settlements for the damage Mueller did to them, but most didn't even get an apology. Mueller couldn't be bothered with how many millions were paid out in Boston because of what he oversaw. He couldn't be bothered with the $5.8 million that was paid to Hatfield because the FBI under Mueller and under his direction, apparently from what articles said, he took direct oversight over the Hatfield investigation, assuring when there was no evidence that he committed any wrong that he was still the one. It's time that Mueller's investigation come to an end. I think Lee Smith had it right. I think the article by Daniel John Sobieski had things right. We've already had an investigation of Russian collusion, and it was done by U.S. Attorney Rob Rosenstein and FBI Director Robert Mueller, and they shut her down, shut up the information so the Clinton Foundation could be the beneficiary. And goodness sakes, they were big-time beneficiaries. That I yield back.
Yields back.